Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you a recommendations video in lieu of Mother's Day. Now, if you're not aware, here in North America, it is Mother's Day in the month of May, and so I'm bringing you all my recommendations for books about mothers. Now, the appropriate way to tackle this subject is to talk about books that have wonderful, loving mother relationships in them, but of course, as I like to do, I kind of want to go the inappropriate route, which will probably get me in trouble in this video. I'm expecting some hate in the comments. I'm hoping I don't regret filming this because I might not want to film and actually post this by the time that Mother's Day rolls around. Anyway, in this video, I want to talk instead about the worst mothers out there, so the mothers that are terrible. Hopefully this book video will be cathartic for those of you that have difficult relationships with your own mothers or just have a difficult time with Mother's Day in general. I know for many women it can be a really emotional day if you experience infertility, miscarriages, or again have complicated relationships with your living or deceased parent and so forth. So while it's supposed to be a day of celebration, honestly it can be a really tough day. So hopefully this is not actually that inappropriate, but really a chance to kind of have a laugh and a giggle about some really terrible moms, because again, even if you have a complicated relationship, hopefully you can look at these and realize that yours isn't, well, that bad in comparison. All that being said, let's get started. First, before we get started, I do want to mention that I'm going to keep this all spoiler free, which is hard to do, but I want to make sure that everyone can watch this video. The first book I want to talk about is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, which follows a woman who is a journalist who gets the opportunity to go back to her small town to investigate a series of murders. She's reluctant to go back because of the fact that she has a very difficult relationship with her own mother and has basically run away from it, but she goes back, she starts to investigate these murders, and of course the story goes from there. The case itself is really fascinating. If you're not familiar with Gillian Flynn, she writes really dark and disturbing stories with some really complicated, morally gray women, but the mother in the story is something else. She is a lot. You will hate her. She is meant to be hated, and I really like the fact that Gillian Flynn has said on many occasions in many interviews that she purposely goes out of her way to write ugly female characters, because so often women especially, and especially those that are mothers, are really held up on this pedestal and shown to be these like perfect angelic creatures, but really they can be just as terrible as their male counterparts, and I really think that this book fleshes it out. There's so much more I want to say, but I won't, and just know that if you want a story with a difficult mother, this is my first recommendation, and it's a good one. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite mysteries, and that is The Life We Bury by Eskens, and this is the first book in an ongoing mystery series. In this first book, we follow a young man named Joe who has a school assignment to go and write about the life of an older person. Because his own grandparents have passed away, he goes to a senior nursing home, and the only one who's available to talk to is a dying vet. However, this man has actually been accused and went to jail for a horrible crime for both the rape and murder of a young woman, and he is now only out from jail because of the fact that he is dying. And so Joe reluctantly goes and interviews this man and learns about his life. Of course, as you expect with a mystery, you find out more about the case, and perhaps it's not as simple, perhaps it's not as open and shut as you are made out to believe, and the story goes from there. But the reason I want to recommend the book in this video is the fact that Joe has a terrible mother, as you would expect. She's incredibly dysfunctional. She is just awful, and you have Joe really trying to not only take care of himself but also his younger brother who has challenges, and they're just stuck with this terrible mother in the center of the story. And I really strangely enjoy is the wrong word, don't get me wrong, but I'm always fascinated by stories that involve these really complicated relationships that show these ugly sides of family domestic relationships, and it definitely rings through here. I think this is a great character-driven mystery story where the mystery itself honestly is fairly simple, but I love it regardless because I just fell in love with the characters. I really liked Joe. I found him to be very relatable, and I really hated his mother, which I think was the point of the story. Next, let's talk about Midnight Rain by James Newman. This is a coming-of-age story that follows a young boy who sees something that he shouldn't. He basically sees a crime that is being committed, but because of the nature and circumstances surrounding that crime, he is hesitant to go to the police. He tries to reach out to his brother and family and just has to decide whether or not he should stay quiet quiet or if he should come forward. And within the story, yes, you can guess what's coming. This boy has a difficult relationship with his mother. Specifically, there's something that his mother is doing that makes it so much harder for him to come forward, and things just get really complicated, and you get so frustrated by this awful mother character and you just want to yell at her. I think, as you'll see within this video, coming of age stories seem to go hand in hand with terrible mothers, and this is one of my personal favorites. It's dark, it's disturbing, it's definitely gritty and goes there. It's very much the coming of age story in the flavor that the child loses their innocence through the events that take place, and in the backdrop of all this is a mother just not making things better, but probably just making things worse. So if you're in the mood for that, here you go. Next is A Foster Home and Flies by Lutzke, and this is a coming-of-age novella that follows a young boy who wakes up to find out that his mother has passed away. I believe she is an alcoholic, and so within the story he is reluctant to tell the authorities what is going on because he's supposed to participate in a spelling bee, and so he decides to stay in the house and stay quiet about it for the days leading up to the spelling bee, and then afterwards he will confess, and then of course have to go off to a foster home, as the title suggests. In the meantime, he is living with his dead body, so it's a really weird, creepy story. This might be the only book on this list where the mother is dead from the beginning, so she's not actually an active participant, but the fact that she's gotten to this state due to her own addictions and so forth and left her child alone in the world, I still think it fits the bill, and yeah, definitely can make a spot on this list. As I've often said with Lutzke, he does a fantastic job of writing really emotional stories. I find in terms of horror, his books are very unconventional, where they definitely lean more into emotions and just straight up scares, and you more get like an unsettling feeling because of the fact that his books are written with a lot of emotions and a lot of depth and really kind of have a macabre feel to them that I highly recommend. I really love his work. Next is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, and this is a literary thriller that is told from the perspective of a mother who is recounting the childhood of her young boy Kevin, who is growing up, and she really describes how she was trying to raise him and the challenges of that because he was not a really emotionally attached child, and so in turn she was not really attached to him either. And this is a great book that really explores the topic of nature versus nurture. The idea is the child just like that, or is he more so a reflection of the mother's treatment of him? It's a book I first read well before I was a mother, and I definitely think it's one I want to revisit and see how it affects me now, because I do remember it being a really dark story, but I think I'll see it differently this time around, and I'm almost afraid to go back to it because it's really grim. It's not a fun thriller like a lot of the other ones that come out these days, but I do think that it reflects really well on motherhood. And again, I do really appreciate those stories that take an interesting or dangerous look at motherhood, where they dare to show the imperfections of people and really show them as humans rather than these perfect creatures, which we know them are not to be. And speaking of coming of age stories, I also want to mention Children in the Dark by Jonathan Janz. And this is a book that I read years ago, so I'll be honest, the details of this one are a little bit sparse in my mind, but this is a story that involves a group of children that are trying to fight against the evil, very classic narrative in the style of something like It. And the reason I want to include this in the list is that while I don't remember the specifics of the book, I do remember that after finishing this book, I thought I should make a video about terrible mothers, and I started compiling a list of books. And so this one was right up at the top of that list. And so while I don't really remember why the mother is terrible, I'm curious to reread this one and find out, and definitely it had to be pretty bad or I wouldn't have been inspired to film a whole video on the topic. Next, let's talk about a classic, and that is Carrie by Stephen King, which is about a young girl who becomes a woman and has an infamous night at prom. And if you have read the book or even seen the movie, you know that her crazy, religious, fanatical mother is the worst and definitely does not help the situation. So I definitely think that this one is a classic book to put on the list if you're looking for a really iconic horror mom that is absolutely terrible. So definitely recommend that one if you're looking for that. And I thought it'd be great to round out this list of bad mothers with a bad grandmother, because I next want to talk about Nana by Brandon Massey. And this is a horror book that starts out with a woman who is grieving the loss of their grandmother, who actually raised them as if they were their own daughter. And so now that she has passed away, this woman feels very alone, and right after the funeral, her own mother, who was absent in her life, showed up. And so of course, because of this grief and this loss, she is anxious to reconnect with her own mother. They invite her to stay with them, and the story goes from there. This is one of the most wild, crazy stories about like a super sexualized, crazy grandma, because of course she is grandma to the woman's children, and it's just a really bizarre story. Like within the first chapter, when you first meet her, the first thing she does is she hits on the husband of her daughter, and the story just gets weirder from there. If you are offended or bothered by weird sexual stuff in horror books, and books just make you really uncomfortable, this is one you might want to avoid. I kind of enjoyed it because it was so out there, so different, and just off the beaten path. And yeah, I had fun with Crazy Grandma. Crazy Nana, I enjoyed her. I thought she was a lot of fun. Not even the worst grandma on this list. In fact, I would say she's one of the better ones. So I would say if you had to pick a favorite of this list in terms of ranking from best to worst, she would be one of the better ones. So I do recommend this one, and I would love to see if you share my opinion that she's not the worst of the worst, you know what I mean. And I want to talk about Beneath by Kristi DeMeester. This is another horror book that I really love and talk about a lot on my channel. This is a story that follows a woman who is working as a journalist and ends up going back to her small town in order to investigate a snake handling church. And within the story, we also get the perspective of a young girl who has just been bitten by a snake in this church. And then we also get the perspective of the pastor who is having ungodly thoughts, let's say. And this is a book that has a lot of fantastic themes surrounding femininity, sexuality, and motherhood. And I actually got the opportunity to interview the author when I was on the podcast Books in the Freezer, and so I got the chance to talk to Kristi DeMeester, and she was very honest in the fact when I asked her about the role of motherhood within the story. And I'll just say that the book is really unflinching. It doesn't necessarily paint the nicest relationship or the nicest view on certain relationships when it comes to motherhood. And the author really just admits to the fact that yes, she was writing a book and really wanted to show the flaws within motherhood, and it goes there. I love it because the author clearly wrote a lot of her own story or backstory within this one. I think that it is powerful and strong and gritty. It's definitely a more raw book, but I love it because of that, because it doesn't feel like it's over edited and polished to a degree. Instead, it feels just very unflinching. It feels like the author wrote with emotion and rage and built it into the story, and you can definitely see that. So I do recommend this one if you want a story that just thematically has some really tough messaging around terrible mothers. This one is powerful, and I think it's fierce, and I do highly recommend it. And the last book I want to talk about, I'm not actually sure counts as a bad mother. So I want to talk about Cersei from A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin, the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. And I am due to reread this. And so a lot of times when I'm thinking about the series, I am now more thinking about the TV show. So I want to put Cersei on this list, but I do want your opinions down below. Again, kind of try to keep it spoiler free, or leave some spaces if you're going to talk spoilers in the comments. But Cersei, was she actually a bad mother? Like, she was a terrible human being, don't get me wrong, but was her traits as a mother actually what was terrible about her? Or were those almost her only redeeming factors? So I'm definitely due for a reread so I can answer those questions for myself. I'd love to know your opinions down below. Does Cersei from A Game of Thrones belong in this list, or is she actually kind of decent compared to a lot of the other mothers I just talked about? So that is it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, are there any that you're planning on checking out for yourself? I would also love to hear from you. What is a horror, thriller, or any kind of book that you love that has a bad mom in it? Now, once again, before I get more thumbs down on this video, I hope you all know that I really do mean this tongue in cheek. I hope that you all have a good Mother's Day if you celebrate here in North America. I hope that it is a good holiday for you in whatever way you celebrate or don't celebrate it. And of course, I have so much respect for the mothers in this world, but I also have a lot of strong feelings for those that are excluded from this holiday, that find this holiday to be difficult because of their own challenging relationships in their life. And so I hope that this video is just simply a fun way to, again, have some laughs, to have some brevity, and is not meant to be taken too seriously. It's really not meant to be an attack. Again, I am a mother myself, and I really think that motherhood requires a lot of humor in order to get through it all. And so again, if you ever feel like a bad mother yourself, you can always read one of these books and go, hey, I'm not so bad. I didn't do this. So hopefully that will give you just something to smile about. Again, if you're new to my channel, I normally do book reviews and recommendations for horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy. You can help me out by sharing this video around online. Give it a thumbs up if you didn't totally hate it and it didn't offend you. And if you want to drop a comment, even if just emoji, like a picture of a mother, is there an emoji for that? There should be, I assume. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.